Have you ever felt it? That cold prickle on the back of your neck, the sudden, unshakable feeling that you are not alone. It often happens in the quietest moments, when the house is still, when the world outside has gone to sleep. You tell yourself it is just your imagination, a trick of the light, a sound from the street. But a small, persistent part of you knows better. It knows that the silence is not empty. It is waiting. It is listening. Fear is an invitation. It is a doorway to experiences that lie beyond the mundane world. Most people spend their lives refusing this invitation. They lock the door. They board up the windows. We will journey together into 5 stories, 5 places where the veil between worlds has worn thin. We will begin in a house where the walls themselves seem to breathe. From there, we will gaze into a mirror that shows more than just a reflection. We will climb a set of stairs where footsteps fall in the dead of night. We will stand before a cellar door that remains locked for a very good reason. And finally, we will find ourselves on a lonely road that never ends. Are you sure you want to know what lies waiting on the other side of this door? Every town has a place like this, a landmark of local dread. Our first story begins with such a house. It doesn't just sit on the hill overlooking the town, it presides over it, a silent, decaying monarch on a throne of dying grass and gnarled, leafless trees. Locals call it the Hollow House. The name comes from the wind forcing its way through broken panes, a low, mournful sigh that sounds like the house is in constant agony. Its paint has surrendered to time, peeling away, and the entire structure seems weary, its spine bent, as if the weight of its own history is crushing it. No one has lived there for 50 years, not since the Ashworth family fled into the night, leaving everything behind. A half-eaten dinner, toys on the nursery floor. The official report cited a dispute, but the townspeople knew better. They whispered that the house didn't just let them leave, it chased them out. This is where our story truly takes root. With a historian named Arthur Finch. Arthur was a man of unshakable logic. To him, ghosts were merely symptoms of faulty wiring and overactive imaginations. The Hollow House, with its rich tapestry of fear, was not a place of spirits, but a puzzle to be solved, the ultimate challenge to his rational worldview. He was determined to document its history, to debunk the myths. After weeks of research, he finally stepped across its threshold. The air inside was heavy and still, thick with the smell of damp decay, and something faintly sweet, like dying flowers. Dust motes swarmed in the weak light. He felt not fear, but the thrill of the challenge. He set up his equipment in the main living room, a camera, sensors, a voice recorder, and a notepad. He was not a ghost hunter. He was a scientist in a laboratory of decay. He moved with methodical purpose, tapping walls, checking for drafts, noting every groan of the old house and attributing it to a rational cause. He was in control. It was as the sun finally bled out below the horizon, plunging the room into a deep darkness, that the house began to change. The ambient groans of settling timber ceased. An absolute, profound silence fell. And in that silence, he heard it for the first time. A soft, dry rustling sound from within the walls. "Vermin," he murmured, making a note, a smug smile on his lips. The house was performing as predicted, but the sound didn't scurry away or stop. It simply continued, a steady, patient scratching from within the plaster, a sound that seemed to be listening. Then, the sound shifted. The scratching softened, becoming a whisper. Not a voice, but a long, drawn-out hiss, like air escaping a punctured lung. It was a sound that was fundamentally wrong. It felt organic, alive. His academic curiosity battled a rising dread. The scientist won for the moment. He switched on his audio recorder, his hand not quite steady, and placed the microphone directly against the wall. The small red light glowed, a tiny beacon of technology in the ancient decay. He would capture it, analyze it, explain it. That's when the cold came. Not a draft, but a deep, penetrating chill that sank into his bones. His thermometer showed the temperature plummeting. His breath plumed in the beam of his flashlight. As the cold intensified, so did the sound. The hiss was no longer in one spot. It was coming from the wall to his left, his right, from behind him. The entire room was breathing around him. The hissing chorus began to modulate, to find a form, a word. His name. It started faintly, woven into the hissing. He froze, telling himself it was auditory pareidolia, the brain creating patterns from noise, an explanation. But then it grew louder, a sibilant chorus rising from the very bones of the house. The walls were now whispering his name, softly, dryly, from every corner of the room. The sound was inside his head now, a dry rustle against his own thoughts. The man of logic was gone, replaced by a creature of pure fear. The house knew him. It had been waiting. He had come to find a story, to capture it and pin it down like a specimen. He did not realize he was about to become part of it. Our second story is not about a house, but about a single object, a testament to the idea that some inanimate things are not so inanimate after all. They watch, they wait, and they absorb the lives lived around them. It begins with a young woman named Elara, an artist with a penchant for the forgotten, for things with a history etched into their surfaces. She was a collector of stories, though she didn't yet know she was about to become part of one. One rainy Tuesday, the kind that washes the city in shades of gray, she found herself drawn into a dusty antique shop she'd passed 100 times before. The air inside was thick and still, heavy with the scent of old paper, decaying wood, and the faint metallic tang of tarnished silver. It was a labyrinth of lost treasures and forgotten lives, a place where every object seemed to hold its breath. And there, tucked away in the deepest, darkest corner of the shop, almost completely obscured by a stack of yellowed newspapers, she found it. A tall oval mirror, framed in tarnished, black-painted wood. The carvings that wound around its frame were not merely flowers and vines. They were strange, thorny, predatory-looking things, coiled as if ready to strike. The glass itself was dark, possessing a strange, smoky depth that seemed to swallow the dim light of the shop rather than reflect it. The shopkeeper, a frail man with watery eyes and hands that trembled ever so slightly, emerged from the shadows. He was reluctant to sell it. He didn't haggle. In fact, he offered it to her for a pittance, his voice a low, urgent whisper. He warned her that the mirror was unsettling, that it had been in his family for generations, a silent, unwelcome heirloom. He told her that the reflections it showed were not always accurate. "It doesn't just show you what's there," he rasped, his eyes refusing to meet hers, instead fixed on some point over her shoulder. "It shows you what wants you to see, or what's waiting on the other side." Elara, ever the pragmatist, dismissed his words as the ramblings of an old man, the kind of folklore that gives an old object its charm. She took it home, the heavy object feeling like an anchor in her small car. Once in her apartment, she placed it in her bedroom. It stood opposite her bed, a silent, dark sentinel, immediately altering the room's atmosphere, making the familiar space feel suddenly alien and cold. That first night, sleep wouldn't come. She felt a palpable sense of being watched, a prickling on her skin that originated from the dark, glassy surface across the room. The mirror was not just showing a reflection of her room, it was showing its own version of it. The colors were subtly muted, the cheerful yellow of her walls a sickly jaundiced shade. The shadows it cast were deeper, inkier, pooling in the corners with a permanence that defied the soft lamplight. It started with small things, tiny impossibilities that she could almost convince herself she'd imagined. For a fleeting second, the reflection of a perfume bottle on her dresser would be missing, only to reappear when she blinked. A book she'd left closed on her nightstand would be reflected as open to a random page. She started to feel a creeping sense of unease, a quiet gaslighting perpetrated by the object in her room. She tried to document it, taking photos with her phone, but the camera always captured a perfect mundane reflection, a liar's alibi. The true turning point came one evening. A faint creak echoed from the hallway. She glanced at the mirror and her blood ran cold. In the reflection, the door to her bedroom was slightly ajar, opening into an impenetrable darkness. She looked from the mirror to the actual door. It was shut tight, the deadbolt firmly in place. It was no longer just distorting her reality, it was extending an invitation. Then came the worst part, the figure. It didn't appear all at once. At first it was just a smudge in the reflection, a dark distortion in the deepest corner of the mirrored room, a place her lamp couldn't quite reach. She tried to clean the glass, but the stain was not on the surface. It was the reflection itself. Over the next few days, the smudge began to coalesce, to darken and take shape. It became a tall, thin silhouette standing motionless in the darkest corner of the reflected room. It had no features, no details, just a void in the shape of a man. For a week, it remained perfectly still, a terrifying piece of abstract art. Until one night, as she lay frozen in her bed, pretending to be asleep, she glanced at the mirror and saw that it had moved. It was a foot closer to the reflected version of her bed. Its head was now tilted, as if listening, observing her with unseen eyes. The psychological toll was devastating. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford, her waking hours a paranoid haze. Finally, at her breaking point, she ripped a heavy blanket from her bed and threw it over the mirror, silencing its dark gaze. The relief was immediate and profound. The room felt lighter, warmer. For 2 full days she lived in peace, the silence in her apartment finally feeling safe again. She began to convince herself it had all been a product of stress, an overactive imagination. On the 3rd morning, emboldened by the quiet, she decided she needed to know for sure. She had to prove to herself that it was over. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stood before the shrouded mirror. With a deep, shaky breath, she pulled the blanket away. The room in the reflection was empty, except for her. The corner where the shadow always stood was vacant. A wave of giddy, tearful relief washed over her. She laughed, a choked, hysterical sound. It was over. But as she turned away, a flicker of wrongness in her peripheral vision made her freeze. She slowly turned back, and then she noticed something that made the air crystallize in her lungs. The blanket she had just pulled away, the heavy woolen blanket now pooled at her feet, was still there in the reflection, draped perfectly over the mirror's surface. Her mind struggled to comprehend the impossibility, and from behind the reflected blanket, from within the glass, she saw the fabric begin to move. It wasn't being pulled. It was being pushed aside from the other side. Slowly, a shadow of a long, thin hand reached out, its fingers like black skeletal twigs, uncurling to grip the edge of the cloth and slowly, deliberately, pull the fabric aside. Our 3rd story takes us to the heart of a sleeping city, to a 12-story glass tomb that scraped the clouds. It centers on a man named Leo, a night watchman who had come to prefer the company of ghosts to that of people. He was a man seeking refuge from the noise of his own past. And in the sterile, echoing halls of this newly constructed, unoccupied office building, he had found a fragile piece. The structure was a monument to commerce, but for Leo, it was a sanctuary, a silent fortress against the world. The building's centerpiece was its spine, a grand open staircase of concrete and steel, spiraling up through the central atrium like the vertebrae of some long-dead leviathan. During the day, it was a marvel of architecture, flooded with light. But at night, it transformed, becoming a cavernous, shadowy void that seemed to swallow sound and light alike. It was a place of profound emptiness, a vertical abyss that connected the silent earth to the silent sky. Leo had grown accustomed to the building's unique symphony of silence, the low, constant hum of the ventilation system, the distant sigh of traffic from the streets below, the gentle creak of his own chair. These were the sounds of solitude, and he enjoyed them. He believed he was the only soul in this vast, silent space, a lone king in a kingdom of glass and shadow. For the first few weeks, his belief held true. The silence was a balm, deep and unbroken, until one night, it was a single distinct sound that cut through the silence like a shard of glass, a sharp, heavy thud. It was a sound of immense weight and finality, as if a body had been dropped from a great height. It came from above, echoing down the spiral throat of the stairwell. Leo froze, every nerve ending alight. His first thought was rational, settling. The building was new, full of groans and sighs as it adjusted to its own weight. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and walked to the base of the stairs, shining its powerful beam up into the cavernous space. The landings were stark and empty, geometric shapes receding into the gloom. He saw nothing. No fallen debris, no malfunctioning equipment. He completed a full patrol of the ground floor, checking that every door was still locked, every window secure. Everything was as it should be. He returned to his desk, the seed of unease planted deep in his gut. He told himself it was nothing, but the silence that followed felt different. It was no longer peaceful. It was watchful. An hour passed. An hour of listening to his own heartbeat. An hour of staring into the mouth of the stairwell. Then at precisely 3 a.m., he heard it again. Thud. The exact same sound from what seemed to be the exact same place. But it felt different this time. It wasn't louder, not in volume, but it was clearer, more defined. It felt closer. Not physically closer, but psychologically. The first had been an event. This was a message. Protocol dictated he stay put and call it in. But something else, a mixture of professional pride and a primal, foolish curiosity took hold. This was his building, his sanctuary, and something was trespassing. He would not be intimidated by a noise in the dark. He would take the stairs. He would confront whoever or whatever was making the noise. He would reclaim his silence. He ascended into the darkness, his footsteps echoing unnaturally in the enclosed space. The cold steel of the handrail felt slick beneath his palm. He reached the third-floor landing, the spot where he guessed the sound had originated. He swept his light across the bare concrete. Nothing. Dust. Silence. A wave of relief washed over him, followed by a pang of foolishness. He was about to turn back, to dismiss the entire event. Then he heard it. Thud. Loud, clear, and utterly unmistakable. It came from directly above him. The fourth-floor landing. A cold dread, sharp and pure, pierced through his resolve. This was no coincidence. He climbed to the fourth floor. Nothing. He waited. Thud. The fifth floor. He was chasing it. He climbed to the fifth, then the sixth, then the seventh. The pattern was maddening, perfect in its execution. He would arrive on a silent, empty landing, his breath ragged, and after a few moments of ringing silence, the sound would come again. Thud, always one floor above him. And around the 8th floor, the true soul-crushing realization settled in. He wasn't chasing it at all. It was leading him, drawing him upward floor by floor with a terrifying patience. It wasn't fleeing, it was waiting. He reached the 11th floor, his lungs burning, his shirt soaked with a cold sweat. And the game paused. The silence that fell was absolute, heavier than anything he had ever experienced. It was the silence of anticipation. He was trapped. Below him, 11 floors of darkness he now knew he could not descend. The thought of turning his back on this thing, of it following him down, was infinitely more terrifying than climbing up. Above him, the final floor. The silence from the 12th floor was a question. It was patient. It knew the answer. He took a breath and stepped onto the first stair leading to the top. The moment his foot made contact, the sound came. Thud. It was on the landing of the 12th floor. It wasn't a taunt this time, it was an acknowledgement, a welcome. The final step had been taken. The invitation had been accepted. As Leo reached the top of the stairs, his light cutting a nervous path across the vast, unfinished space, a new sound followed. It started near the stairwell and began to move away from him into the deepest darkness of the top floor. It was a soft, dry, scraping sound. The sound of something impossibly heavy, something brittle and ancient, being dragged across the rough concrete floor. It was the sound of unnatural movement, a slow, deliberate retreat to a chosen position. The scraping stopped. The silence that rushed back in was no longer empty. It was a presence. In that moment, Leo understood everything. The thuds were not a mystery to be solved. They were a summons. The ascent was not a chase. It was a pilgrimage. He had been drawn here to the highest, most isolated point of his sanctuary. The thing that had led him here wasn't hiding. It had simply been preparing the room. He stood at the threshold of the 12th floor, paralyzed, knowing with every fiber of his being that he was not there to be a watchman. He was the guest of honor. And he also knew, as he stared into the waiting dark, that he would not be alone when he finally stepped forward. Our fourth story takes us to the countryside. It begins with a family of 3 who inherit an old isolated farmhouse. In the back of the kitchen, there was a door, the cellar door. The old man had sealed it years ago, claiming it was structurally unsound. It was a cage door, designed not just to keep people out, but to keep something in. Then one night a new sound joined the chorus, a soft scraping sound, the sound of fingernails dragging across thick oak. That night the sound returned. This time Sarah heard it too. It was louder, more insistent. The next morning the evidence was undeniable. On the bottom of the oak door were fresh marks. But tonight the sound was different. A loud, rhythmic banging, being slammed against the inside of the door over and over. Then, as suddenly as it began, the banging stopped. It was the sound of a key turning slowly in a lock. They watched, paralyzed, as the key completed its turn, and at the exact same moment, the heavy padlock on the cellar door springing open, the silence of an open door, the silence of something that had been trapped for a very, very long time and was now, finally, free to climb the stairs. Our final story unfolds on a ribbon of asphalt cutting through a vast, empty wilderness. It's a story about a man named Caleb. It was late, well past midnight, and he was tired. He calculated he was about 2 hours from home. An hour had passed. The fuel gauge had not moved. The screen showed only a single blue dot, floating in a vast, empty gray space. It was then that he saw the first sign. Far ahead, something was on the road. It was not a person, tall, impossibly thin. A pitch-black silhouette, a hole shaped like a man. He slammed the accelerator. A few miles later, he saw another. They were appearing more frequently now. Then it happened. The engine sputtered. With a final shuddering cough, the engine went silent. The car coasted in absolute silence, then rolled to a stop. He was stranded, surrounded by them. Then, in the faint ambient light, one figure moved. All down the road on both sides, they turned to face him. In dreadful unison, they took one slow step forward. They would not rush. They had all the time in the world. The stories are over now. The whispers in the walls have faded. The shadow in the mirror has retreated. The footsteps on the stairs have reached their destination. The cellar door stands open, and a lone car sits powerless on an endless road. We have walked through these dark places together, but we do not return unchanged. We have brought something back with us, a piece of the abyss. Tonight, when you lie in your bed, you will listen differently. Every creak will be a question. Every shadow will be a potential waiting threat. It is a portable darkness, the darkness you carry behind your own eyes. Our small, brightly lit world is like a single campfire in an infinite, ancient forest. But we can hear the sounds from the trees. So, we leave you with one final question. A cliffhanger for your own life. The stories are over, but the night is long, and the darkness is always listening. The final question is this. You know what happened in these 5 stories? What do you think happens next to you?